I'm Wilson Lai.
I'm Benjamin Ya.
I'm Eli Sands.
And I'm Thanmye Lagudu.
You're listening to Deep Cut. Eega, 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 Eega. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
On Deep Cut, we compare a director's most popular film with a personal favorite chosen by one of us.
We also discuss the director's life and career to bring context that helps us view their movies as they may want us to.
Also, I'm drinking a seltzer, so I'll at least be a little buzzed for this discussion.
Yeah, let's go.
Also, Buzz, Eega, Buzz. Okay, I don't know.
Ladies and gentlemen, he's correct.
I was trying to make it sly. I didn't want to be obvious about it.
It was not obvious at all.
Not at all. Unfortunately, it is not obvious at all.
Thanks, Ted.
Last episode, with the help of our special guest Thanmye, we were introduced to the maximalist world of S.S. Rajamouli and discussed his epic two-parter Bahubali: The Beginning and Bahubali: The Conclusion. On this episode, we will continue to dig deeper into Rajamouli's filmography by talking about his previous film, 2012's Eega.
Eega!
Eega tells the story of Nani, who is a flower decorator who is head over heels in love with his neighbor Bindu. He gets killed by a rich businessman / all-around bad person, Sudeep, who is also obsessed with Bindu. Nani gets reincarnated as a housefly, and Eega to exact to exact his revenge. Eega! Yeah!
Nani is the titular Eega, yes.
Yes, just to make that clear to listeners who don't know. Is Eega a Telugu word or a Tamil word?
It's a Telugu word, yeah. It means housefly.
Nice.
Very straightforward.
Yeah.
Title.
Yeah. I chose this as a deep cut, even though it is sort of considered to be one of Rajamouli's most famous films. I think it is a very perfect encapsulation of Rajamouli working within small means to make the most maximalist movie possible. Right before the success of this film, he has not been getting, to quote another podcast, blank checks to make his films like he is now. So I think it's very fascinating to see him work under some constraints, but also I think the action sequences in Eega are so inventive and unique. And I think there's so many choices in this film that really make it a special action blockbuster. And I do regard Eega as one of the tip-top action movies of the 2010s. Yeah. And before we get into more context, I want to hear how you all feel about Eega. Thanmye, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think, Wilson, your choice for this being the deep cut was, I think, really great because I think this was also, when this movie came out, Rajamouli was not as widely known, not even in India, especially not even around the world, now like he is now with the Bahubali franchise and RRR. But I do think you get a sense of his filmmaking and what he tries to do, especially with sort of like a budget constraint where he doesn't have like the help of massive stars or massive VFX budgets, what he's able to come up with these budget constraints and how he's, even with those constraints, he's able to create this entire world and still be able to create some of the most like breathtaking, set pieces that have kind of come out of Telugu cinema, especially, I think. So I think this being the choice as your deep cut is really great. And I think it's also one of my favorite movies. I think for me, a lot of, and I feel like I've talked about this before, a lot of Rajamouli's stuff is hard for me to really fully divorce from my nostalgia of it.
Mm-hmm.
And Eega is really one of those movies that is up there. I think on my current ranking, it's like my number 2 next to Bahubali 2. So I also really do love this movie. And I'm right there with you, Wilson, as this is one of, I think, the defining blockbusters of the 2010s. And I think something that more people need to see too, just to see, what kind of stuff you can make on such a small budget,
Mhm.
and what you're able to do with such a small budget, and yet still retain a voice and still retain techniques that that Rajamouli kind of builds on with the Bahubali franchise and RRR. This is a great choice for a deep cut.
Yeah, Thanmye, did you see it when it came out in 2012?
I did. I saw it in the theater,
Oh.
and
I'm
again,
so insanely jealous of you. I have still yet to see a Rajamouli film in the theater. I saw RRR yesterday, and unfortunately, I missed the 2 screenings that there were in Hong Kong, so I had to watch it on my computer monitor. But I did enjoy it. But I was
yeah,
sulking because I was like big screen experience.
Oh.
yeah, and that's one of the perks of being onto Rajamouli before everyone else. I was there from the beginning. Hey, and so I got to watch all his stuff in the theater since
From
Magadira.
Bahubali,
So
the beginning.
yeah, so that's one of the benefits of being there before everyone else got there. But yeah, no, I remember seeing this in the theater, and I was like, what? Came out in 2012. I was in ninth grade. My family and I think we drove to this theater in Orlando where they only showed Indian movies there. Not only Indian movies, but that was the only theater where they showed Indian films on top of the rest of the stuff. And I remember being similarly sort of breathtaken when I first saw it, and kind of oh my God, this premise is so out there, and so it's almost like Rajamouli is parodying himself a little bit, right? With what he did in Magadira with this idea of reincarnation. It kind of comes off as that. And, and there is a little bit of, I think, definitely some self-awareness in the film, I think more so than a lot of his other films, but somehow he still has that sauce. He still has that way of making you care for a housefly and get you invested in the story and imbue this CG housefly with human qualities, which I still am fascinated by. And I don't know how he did it. And it's amazing. But I remember when I first saw it, I was like, how is he making me care about this? Even though it's such a ridiculous premise.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But I'm very interested to hear what Eli and Ben have to say about it, because I feel like from me and Wilson, you'll get undying praise for this. For me, it's mainly because everything is sort of clouded in this nostalgia that I love to hear other perspectives. So I definitely want to get your takes on it for sure.
I mean, I adored this movie.
Yeah.
You're right, Thanmye, that it is a preposterous premise, but the movie knows that you know that, and then it takes it seriously so that you can just have fun with it and get invested in it at the same time. I continue to be impressed by Rajamouli's creativity and inventiveness with everything from how he's embedding VFX into the shot to camera placement to even camera types. He, I think, has a GoPro on a guy's forehead as a man is attacking his forehead. And the humor is incredibly sharp. And this is the movie of the deep cut canon where I have definitely screenshotted the most stills because there are just so many things that are so both funny and impressive to look at. And my MVP, hands down, is Mr. Sudeep for his performance as the murderer who kills Nani. And he gives one of the finest comedic performances I've ever seen, truly not speaking hyperbolically. It is like Who Framed Roger Rabbit levels of technically impressive, along with just this outstanding comedic timing and moldability of his face. It's such a delight to see this man perform. I'm really impressed by everything this movie is doing. And last episode, we talked about how Bahubali and the other main characters are smart, right? It's not just clever, it's not just quippy, and it's not the writer showing off how clever he is. The writer is embedding that smartness within the characters. And that is absolutely present here. And it's a huge part of the enjoyment of this movie for me. All around, what a picture.
Yeah. And mind you, Sudeep is playing Sudeep.
Right.
And Nani is playing Nani because the actor's name is Nani.
Right. Well, for the first 30 minutes, he is.
Yes, that's
Yes.
true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, with Sudeep, like for him, his performance imbues the fly with character.
Yeah.
Yes.
So he's really playing the fly in a way, if you really think about it. His reaction shots are the performance of the fly. CG notwithstanding.
Kuleshov effect notwithstanding, too.
Yeah.
But Thanmye relying on Eli to be the person to be critical of the film is fool's errand. He always too nice. Which means, once again, this responsibility is going to fall on me.
Boo.
Which I hate.
The Sudeep of the episode.
Boo.
Love it. I mean, I love this film as a kind of, almost like a zany comedy. When Thanmye, you called it kind of almost Rajamouli parodying himself, then that kind of maybe helped me click some things into place in terms of like where the humor stands. I think my main kind of resistance to the film, aside from the set pieces, is actually something about the tone of it. And something about the tone of Eega, for me personally, feels slightly off. Why I have this reaction, I can't explain, but what it is that somehow the revenge plot of this gets too violent for me. Which I'm maybe trying to unpack maybe through this episode, why it doesn't quite click for me in this sense. Like seeing the fly bathed in blood is silly, yes, but also something about it is gruesome. And then watching him cut Sudeep is also somehow also very gruesome. And I get that it is a proportionate response to Sudeep, who kills a man, right? It is proportionate.
Yeah.
It is proportionate. I give it that. But I think it's more of the... this is going to sound whack as hell, but there's a Pixar level kind of anthropomorphism of the fly. And the comedy tone. And I swear there is a musical motif that sounded very Disney/Pixar-like at some point in this film. But that kind of comedic tone and the I'm going to kill you style of revenge doesn't quite mesh for me. And there's this tonal whiplash for me of like, here's this like B movie, like BEE movie romance, plus Fly wants to murder a man. And those two halves don't come together for me.
I think I kind of see what you're saying, Ben. Do you feel that that's partially because you felt, as I felt on a certain level, that you're kind of rooting for Sudeep in this movie?
Interesting.
Hold on. Okay.
I don't think so. I think
A
that's,
bridge too far?
I think that would be crazy. I don't think it makes sense to root for Sudeep, but it's more of like when you think about protagonist and you think about revenge, usually like you want the protagonist to maybe hold some kind of moral high ground.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's plenty of revenge films where the revenge is also killing. Like, I mean, think of something like Kill Bill. Like, there's so much violence coming from Uma Thurman's character because she wants to kill Bill. But
Is that what that movie's about?
that's why I can't give an answer about why this is a little off for me. But I think it's maybe because of the very strong comic overtones of it and the fantastical quality of it, not meshing with the violent murderous revenge part. That's the best I can explain it.
I think that holds water.
For me, I think the over the topness on all fronts, like even everything out, right? Because Sudeep is like an impossibly evil man, and Nani's love for Bindu is this impossible thing where, like, even as she rejects him over and over again, he still rightfully believes that she actually likes and even loves him. So I think if you're operating within this Rajamouli understanding of the universe, right? That I have this idea that Rajamouli always, like, in order to achieve a maximalist effect when he's presenting action, he needs to build up all these goals and these promises that these characters make in a maximalist sense.
Right.
So in this film, Nani gets killed and the reason for his reincarnation is to protect Bindu from Sudeep. And it is his mission, life's mission as a fly. He will not stop until Sudeep is dead. And I think that because everything is working at such a high level, everything really clicks for me in this. And even though I think it is on a lighter tone, like comedy-wise, I think if you look at this as a follow-up to Maryada Ramana, which is a Buster Keaton...
It's a remake of a Buster Keaton movie called Our Hospitality, yeah.
Yes, and if you like sort of see it as like a continuation of Rajamouli's interest in silent cinema, and I feel like there is a lot of like links there, right? Like the fly does not talk. Like once Nani dies, Nani doesn't come back to voice over this fly. The fly doesn't talk for the rest of the film, which I think is an incredible feat, right?
Bold.
You have an action hero that cannot say anything and works with gestures and facial expressions. And Sudeep is also operating, like his performance is also operating on this heightened level of like screwballness even as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when placed in that like context, it works as a whole for me. And that's why, yeah, I don't know, I really, really appreciate it. And I think it's so out of left field for a director to make these choices in a movie that commercially did very well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. There's a lot to respond to. So Eli,
Step number one, rooting for Sudeep.
I think Wilson really did a good job pointing out about Maryada Ramana, because I think when you talk about Sudeep's comedic performance, it is drawing, I think, a lot on Rajamouli's interest in like silent Buster Keaton comedies, right? A lot of the performance there, like for example, that one scene where he's in like that hot box massage thing, and the fly is torturing him, and then he takes off his towel and tries to hit the fly, and then they're having like the business meeting downstairs, and then the guy's like, "Oh, Bear'll be totally stripped," and then Sudeep shows up like literally stripped, and this is the naked truth. I think that's what he says or something.
Yeah,
but yeah, I think Eli, that's such a great connection to make, because I think it links, I think Rajamouli's interest in sort of silent American comedies from the 20s and 30s, and the Who Framed Roger Rabbit, since it's the sort of animated elements interacting with the real life elements, right? And then the more I thought about I'm actually think about rooting for Sudeep. I know I reacted very heavily, but I thought about it in the time. And
he reflected.
I think you do have a little bit of a point there. I reflected very quickly, and I think you make a really good point there, because I think Rajamouli in a lot of his films, his villains are like villains. They're like personifications of pure evil, like in a lot, right? Like, Balal Deva in Bahubali, the British in RRR. And here, Sudeep is like, he's a murderer, he's a womanizer, he's just like every bad quality. But at the same time, right, like he gives this incredible comedic performance, which I think has a way of endearing you to him, right?
Yes.
And that was something I was really astounded by when I first watched it, because I was like, oh my God, like I'm supposed to hate this guy, but he's like hilarious. Rajamouli somehow makes that, like, is able to sell that.
Along with this idea that you're rooting for Sudeep because of how skilled the comedic performance is, and yes, I entirely agree, I think also narratively, this movie is a game of one-upsmanship. Fly Sudeep. And part of what you're rooting for is to see things escalate. Like, there's a moment just before poop really hits the fan when Sudeep has this kind of badass shot where there's smoke swirling around him and he has sunglasses on, and he's committed to his ultimate destruction in the name of killing this fly. And you cheer it on because you want to see the point when he is firing shotguns and machine guns at a fly, destroying his own home. Like, I think both performance-wise and narratively, this movie is calling for you to at least enjoy the escalation that Sudeep goes through.
And Eli, what you're saying there, that can even be traced to, I think, a very universal human thing that we all experience, which is how annoying it is when a fly lands on you and won't leave you alone, right?
Yeah.
you know, and that I think is kind of the bridging of Sudeep being this like just awful, terrible human being into kind of endearing you into his comedic performance. Is that like Rajamouli understands that being stalked by a fly or whatever, right, is just so annoying, right? And he kind of uses that bridge as kind of a bridge to get you to root for his comedic performance.
Yeah.
Which is, I've never seen that done before in a film. I think that kind of helps you put together the puzzle of how he's able to make that jump into getting the audience at that place.
It's a sympathetic experience.
Yeah. And then Ben, to kind of, when you talk about sort of the tones not meshing, I think when I watch a Rajamouli film, I expect a certain level of violence already. So I think with that expectation, you know, when I watched it in theaters, you know, I had seen Magadira, I had seen a lot of his earlier work, right, where there is a lot of violence. And coming into Eega, even though it is much more in that vein of like more of a Pixar-y sort of kids film, even though it's not, like, I know that in my mind, because it's a Rajamouli film, that it's going to have this like exorbitant amount of violence. So I guess for me, it was kind of an expectation thing where I'm like, it's a Rajamouli film, it's going to have violence, you know? So I guess that, and also Wilson sort of talking about Rajamouli setting up, like, because a lot of it is like you buying into the universe of this film, right? And as it is with a lot of his films, where, you know, that kind of evens everything out. But I think that for me, an added element was I just know that's what to expect from a Rajamouli film. It's one of the staples of an SSR film, right? Is this like over the top violence, right? That you know, that sometimes kind of brushes against this like comedic tone. But I don't know. I think for me, it was like, if it's an SSR movie, it's going to have a lot of blood, and you know, and I didn't expect anything different from this. Even though, if like, say you've only seen RRR and then you went to see Eega, you might be a little bit like, okay, like why is this fly murder? Like why is there so much blood? You know, and all of that. But I think for me, it's because I've seen a lot of his films. I know what to expect.
Yeah. And I think it speaks more of his like pre-Bahubali films more than his post-Bahubali films. That's why I think it was like a good choice for a deep cut. Like, even though I personally appreciate and love Magadira more than Eega, I think it is a great like bridging into his later works.
I think thinking about violence in Rajamouli's films is also me realizing that even in Bahubali and RRR, in those films, the violence in them is also still very shocking, even though those are very violent films. Like, Rajamouli does not pull punches with violence. He is always about high impact. And I think with Eega, the use of the needle, Sudeep stepping on them, these are very visceral, relatable things.
Yeah.
And I think that also ties into the idea that being annoyed by a fly is relatable. And so a lot of the pain that Sudeep goes through feels very visceral because you understand that kind of pain.
Yeah.
Which is why, even though he is the villain, the pain that Nani inflicts on him can be felt by you, even though you are also kind of celebrating the violence that the fly is inflicting on the villain.
Right.
You can also feel the pain of the villain.
Right.
He's a bad guy, but he's also very regular in a sense. I mean, we all know businessmen and like just regular folk. Maybe not murderous businessmen, but like there's something about him that feels like an uncle that you know. You know what I mean?
I don't know what uncles you have, Ben, but I get it. I get the point you're trying to make. We all have people in our family like this.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting when thinking about the new Netflix, I guess, remake of this film with Rowan Atkinson. Well, directly inspired by Eega.
Ripoff.
I guess they said in the Wikipedia page, which is Man versus Bee, which I think, at least from the trailer, does not try to give identity to the bee, and it's focused more on Atkinson's character, which I don't know. We'll see how that plays out. We're not going to cover on the pod, but we'll see how that plays out.
I thought it was a movie. It's a TV series. Like, what?
What? Why?
Oh,
that is a movie.
Goodness.
They keep on making limited series when they should make movies.
Okay. Before we get into the meat and bones of this movie, let's do a little bit of context. So, With Eega, like the Bahubalis, it was based on a story by Rajamouli's father, V. Vijayendra Prasad. And the script was also doctored by Rajamouli's brother. So the idea for the film was first developed by Rajamouli's father in the late 1990s. And at the time, he was joking with SSR about a housefly seeking revenge on a human. And Prasad said that he actually first wanted to make it as English language film set in 1830s America, where black boy dies in an attempt to free his family from slavery and is reincarnated as a fly to like exact revenge against slave owners, which definitely would have not been as comedic as this, but I think would have been an interesting film to see. I don't know. I guess after Maryada Ramana, Rajamouli wanted to make a smaller budget film and chose this simple story of a man coming back as a housefly to exact revenge for his lover. But I guess when looking at the script, he realized that it could not be a small film. So this idea of taking a little break from all these big budget movies like Magadira and Maryada Ramana actually turned out to be making an even bigger budget film. And so this was also the first time Rajamouli made two versions of a film. He made a Tamil and a Telugu version, and it was also his first Tamil language film. So both versions of the film were released on July 6th in 2012 in approximately 1,100 screens globally. The film was really critically acclaimed upon release, and Eega was one of the highest grossing Telugu films of that year, earning more than 23 million US dollars. And I think Rajamouli was very happy with the outcome of this film. In all the interviews that I read, he was very proud of the work that he did. So first of all of the actors that he had in the three main roles were all of his first choices. So even though they were like not big stars, he thought they were right for the role, and in my opinion, they were as well. And also, this was his third time working with the VFX company Makuta VFX, and I wanted to shout them out because I didn't get a chance to read up on them for Bahubali, but Rajamouli had worked with them since basically Magadira till RRR, and Makuta is known for a lot of work with Indian films as well as working on the first season of Legion, fun fact. And for Eega, Makuta handled over 2,200 shots.
Whoa.
Ranging from character design of the fly to modeling and all the other invisible visual effects that like come into making a movie of this proportion and this size. Yes, Eli.
While we're on visual effects, something that I noticed that Rajamouli and the Makuta team are doing that's so subtle yet effective is that Rajamouli will shoot the plate shots, the base shots where VFX go in slightly shallow focus so that where the fly will be in the shot, it looks like it's in focus naturally within the camera, like it's being shot through a lens with no VFX.
Yeah.
Really cool and clever.
Yeah, and the macro lenses he uses, it was all very intentional because he and the VFX team made a 3D storyboard with sort of CGI mock-ups before making the film. So I think everything, like all the action beats of the fly were clear to all crew members when shooting. So everyone knew what they were working with. And even Sudeep knows what he was working with as well. And last thing, to respond to your point, Thanmye, about how the character of the fly was made and how you could like feel so much for this fly who doesn't speak, they actually did a photo shoot with a fly. So they used that photo shoot to build most of like the body of the fly, but then they saw the face and the face was like really ugly. And Rajamouli says, some portions of the body were good, but when we enlarged the face, it looked horrendous on the big screen. Now, Eega is the hero of the film, and I can't have an ugly hero. So we had to do some cosmetic changes to create a good-looking fly. That's why he looks so good.
Yeah, he looks great.
I can't believe the film industry has such a high standard of beauty. It's just truly problematic.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Another
Like, I can't believe they had to give cosmetic surgery for a fly. Ridiculous. Anyway.
Hey, you gotta compete with the likes of Ram Charan. You really need to have the hottest fly out there.
that is true.
They did surgery on a grave.
And another fun fact too. I should have maybe mentioned this in the Bahubali episode, but Bahubali was Rajamouli's first film on digital, and Eega was his last film on film that was shot on 35 millimeter.
Oh.
So that's an interesting fact too. So how he was able to achieve all this visual effects and have like a 35 with the 35 print is also kind of, I think, interesting in how it informs our conception of how he made it.
Yeah. And I like the quality of it. I could see some of the scratches in the version that I watched on the screen. I was like, ooh, we're back in the 90s. Well, I guess the early 2010s. In my head, I'm like, oh, the 90s.
Yes.
Well, yeah, 35mm film, like shooting on 35 in the early 2010s already feels still very late to be shooting on 35.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the thing with Rajamouli is, like a lot of directors, he had made a lot of his movies and shot them on film. Like Magadira was shot on film, right? Like a lot of his stuff leading up to Eega, for him, he just said that it's a workflow that he's worked with before. So it just made more sense. I think maybe with Bahubali, he decided to make that jump into digital because he had the extra time to make the movie. And he figured, he had to kind of adapt with the times. But yeah, that's just a fun fact that this was his last movie that he shot on 35.
I mean, with all the visual effects he does, like shooting on film is just more like logistically difficult. Like not being able to preview the shots and make sure like have a post-production guy on set tell you whether the shot works.
Yeah.
It's much more of a gamble to shoot on 35, especially when you can do digital.
Yeah. And I think that's why he made that shift, right? Probably,
yeah.
We talked on the last episode about how Bahubali's VFX are not supposed to be so literal or photorealistic, and that adds a fantastical element, and it's more about the creativity of the design. Here, I will say that the VFX look a little bit more smoothly integrated across the board in most sequences.
I think it's also because like you have that, like when you plan visual effect shots that have to mesh with real life, and here he does that thing which is like most good filmmakers know of, which is that when you put the real life and the CG in the same shot, you got to be smart about when you do it. And generally speaking, Eega, the Nani as a fly in the screen tends to be very small. So like, it doesn't have to have such high fidelity to fit with like Sudeep like flailing around, right? So like that works.
Yeah.
And then when you do see the close up of the fly, the tendency is for most of the shot to be visual effects.
I think that's true.
Yeah.
And so then that works. So then you don't need to do so much suspension of disbelief to put those two, like the real world and the CG stuff together.
But I think what really shines here, right, is what Rajamouli decides to do with the VFX character, how he decides to move him, what sort of obstacles he has to face. Because I'm like, it sort of sucks to have this comparison in my head, but I keep on thinking about Ant-Man because of all like the
bug stuff,
the small sized sequences. And okay, we don't need to talk about Marvel, but that long. but I think the amount of different kinds of scenarios that Rajamouli is able to place Nani Eega in, just in like maybe the first 5 to 10 minutes of his existence as a fly, like just that first section of him learning to survive as a fly with his like wing not sticking out and the flood coming in, him like playing in the park with the girl with the bubbles and getting sucked in, and just that whole like getting used to this new mode of being and mode of presenting a character contains like multitudes of ideas there. And I think just how he's able to come up with all these action sequences that in a R-sized, like human-sized world are very like normal, but I think when placed in a fly-sized world is like life or death, is so interesting to me. And I think that sort of like evens it out, right? Like I think that it's, for me, it's still a David and Goliath story, even until the very end, because the chance of Nani Eega dying is so much higher than Sudeep dying. So I think it is another one of those like impossible feats of a Rajamouli main character to achieve, and being a fly killing a human is obviously definitely one of them.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a bit more of a point responding to Ben about how Rajamouli plans the shots where real life elements interact with CGI. Oh my god, I'm just realizing this might be a spoiler for RRR. I don't know.
It's okay, put it in.
Is it okay? All right. So,
Eli, close your ears.
Should I take my headphones out for a moment?
Yeah, is this interval the interval moment?
No. It's one of the introduction scenes.
Oh.
Oh,
Okay.
tiger fight?
Yeah. Yes.
All right.
Oh, like with Beam?
Yeah. So Ben, when you were saying that, it kind of reminded me about this interview that Rajamouli. It was kind of this promotional thing that Rajamouli did, talking to Ram Charan and Junior NTR, where Junior NTR was basically like, "Why did you make me run so fast in that scene?" And he said it's because animals, one of the issues in a lot of movies is that animals don't run fast enough. And when they don't run fast enough, it's not convincing to the viewer, right? That somebody is being chased by a tiger, for example. So apparently on set, when they were shooting that scene with Junior NTR, his introduction scene, Rajamouli was there with a laser pointer.
Oh.
And he was like, with the laser pointer, I was going fast. And at the same time, he was telling Junior NTR to run and be ahead of the laser pointer, so that the laser pointer was sort of mimicking how fast the tiger was running.
Oh.
So when you said that, Ben, it made me kind of think about how much work Rajamouli kind of puts into this, and how interested he is in trying to convince the viewer, for example, that this fly is a real thing that is interacting with the real world, but also in RRR that a real tiger is chasing this real human being in this kind of singular world. So I thought that was just an interesting thing that kind of just reminded me of that, where, Rajamouli does put a lot of work into thinking about how the computer generated elements interact with the real life elements.
And also, side note, we are like, I'm forcing us all to do an RRR episode just to make Eli watch the film, I think.
I'm down. I want to watch it.
And also, Eli, that's like one of the first scenes in the movie, so I didn't spoil anything too crazy.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the investment is like, watching the scene and seeing how it plays out more so than what happens, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. It's like, it's the same in Bahubali, where he gives you a setup that it seems impossible that the character will find their way out of it. Like a stampeding elephant and the queen mother who has to make it to the pyre. And the question becomes, how do they solve this? And they solve it through smart character decisions and thrills.
I sort of want to talk about the comedy of this film, because I think compared to a lot of other Rajamouli films, this is like pretty funny. I think there's a lot of like small aside moments, especially I really love that scene where Bindu brings Nani Eega to a coffee shop and
Yes.
is asking him what he wants to drink. And it's so funny watching the reaction shots of the waiter. And that's just like a one-off, like less than 2-minute scene, but it's so good.
My favorite one was the one with the burglar.
Yeah.
What the hell was that?
And then he has that post-credits as well, where he changes his life.
Because that was such a random scene, but like it does work on its own as a comedic set piece. Because I think he knows that he has to milk this idea that this woman is in love with a fly. Because that is inherently a ridiculous premise. And like how he can milk that for humor. And I like that bit, even though it is maybe the most extraneous kind of piece of the puzzle. But I'm glad it's there.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's I think that is something that a lot of people who just watch, the Bahubali franchise, or maybe just watch RRR, are kind of missing out on Rajamouli, is that he's a very skilled director of comedy, right?
Yeah.
He is able to stage such hilarious scenes, and the way he sort of like writes dialogue and sets up certain situations, like with the burglar, I think that is really funny. And also just like, I think I kind of touched on it, like all the stuff with Sudeep and him trying to get rid of the fly. And again, like Ben, there is kind of this self-awareness that I think Rajamouli has, like trying to milk as much humor from the situation, but he doesn't really undercut any of the seriousness that he's trying to build too.
Mm.
If this was like a Marvel movie or something, it would be like a very serious thing, and then the serious thing would be sort of undercut by comedy.
Right.
Whereas here, it feels like they feel very interlinked. They sort of complement each other. For example, like when I think right after the interval, Sudeep is like talking to one of his like servants, and he's like, "Hey, do you know like can animals get revenge?" And the guy's like a yes man, so he's like, "Yeah, my grandfather got bit by a snake, you know. I think," and he was like, "No, like smaller animals, like a fly." And then he's like, "Oh yeah, of course, right? Yeah, a fly." I think that is definitely a moment where I realized, like, oh, Rajamouli knows exactly what kind of movie this is, right? But at the same
Yeah.
time, he still wants to build the seriousness of the stakes and the seriousness of like the central revenge plot, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he doesn't do like the Marvel thing of like undercutting it all the time.
Yeah.
I guess that was just a very interesting way that he kind of bounces between the two of them. And I guess a lot of it has to do with the sincerity that he gives both the comedy and the sort of the seriousness of the film.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, I know I keep talking about Marvel, but I think it's probably the best way to sort of compare it, because I think it's just a totally different approach in the way they sort of balance comedy and drama, right?
Mhm.
Where in a Marvel film, it feels like there's a lack of sincerity every time a comedy scene comes in to undercut the dramatic stakes. And that's a thing that I've noticed with a lot of these films, because it's easy to do, honestly. Whereas here, it feels like Rajamouli's like, I don't want the comedy to really undercut the seriousness. I want to kind of give them both equal weight and equal consideration. And I think that's a balancing act that's really difficult, and it's easier to do the Marvel thing. And, not just the Marvel thing, but like the Hollywood blockbuster thing of
Mhm.
having a movie that has drama but always uses comedy to undercut it and deflate a lot of the stakes and deflate a lot of the drama. But Rajamouli never does that.
Yeah.
And I think that's such an incredible skill that I think he possesses that I don't think a lot of filmmakers have.
Yeah.
I think, not just in the States, but like anywhere.
Right. And when there's a moment for seriousness, like I'm thinking about that massive tone shift once Nani gets abducted, and then it cuts into that place where he gets killed, and the color grading of it is just so dark and black, and then it feels like a different movie. It's like a tonal whiplash right there. But I think it is important at that moment, and I think Rajamouli handles that shift very well for something that is so movie changing. I think that moment, I think he does it in the best way possible. Yeah, I think I agree with you, Thanmye. He is a master at maintaining the seriousness of the plot, but also adding comedy to it.
I think he's a master supporter. And what I mean by that is he is all about bolstering as effectively and compellingly as possible the comedy, the drama, and I think especially the performers, by not having to do these undercutting jokes or use bathos.
What's bathos?
Please define that for us.
What's that?
What's bathos? What is that?
Oh,
I'm dumb. I'm sorry.
that is a term from ancient Greek drama that essentially means jokes that let the audience know that the writers and performers are in on the joke and know that it's strange. It's like beating you to saying, this is ridiculous. It's a defensive thing, and it's not sincere. And Thanmye's exactly right, that's what Marvel and American blockbusters do all the time, because God forbid we're not cool,
Yeah.
Right.
But by taking that out of the way, it allows the actors to mesh with the story and tone more, and ultimately everyone benefits from that. Something that I really love is that Rajamouli gives Sudeep so many ways to shine, from this performance of paranoia that's both cartoonish and sympathetic that Thanmye was describing in the scene where he's asking, can like a fly get revenge on people? To the physical comedy of flailing about and being beaten up by a fly, to honestly, the faces that Sudeep is asked to make and the lenses that are used to enhance his face. I know that we're listening to an audio medium right now, but I'm going to show everyone in our call
Oh yeah.
this shot of Sudeep after his face is set on fire by the fly, dunking his face into a bucket of water, which is shot from below, and it looks ridiculous. You both feel Sudeep's pain and you're laughing at the silly face that he's making. When his money's on fire too, there's this one still that I took of him like pulling his face down, and it just looks so silly. It's all these things. Rajamouli's endless creativity goes into making it a better experience for the audience and for the actors to show off their chops. And that's part of what I mean when I say that he's a great supporter of a director.
We have to give him credit for, give him and his performance credit for always committing fully to the premise, no matter how ridiculous it is. Whether it is ridiculous in terms of like this kind of fantastical premise or ridiculous in terms of like the high emotion of an RRR or Bahubali.
Yeah.
Like this story you tell us, Thanmye, about the laser pointer in RRR shows that he is thinking about how much to push the actors. Like he's not letting them be lazy and letting the CG handle it. He's making the actors sell the emotion or the stakes, whether it's a physical thing or a emotional thing. And I think that's something that with American blockbusters, there's a bit of laziness, and it can sometimes feel like, especially with a maybe not necessarily low budget, but a less important kind of blockbuster that a high grade actor might sleepwalk through.
Yeah.
Rajamouli doesn't let his actors sleepwalk through anything. He's gonna use them to like the 100%. And I'm thinking also now about how he wants them to commit 5 years, like with him wanting Prabhas to like commit fully to Bahubali for, 5 years? And maybe not to belabor the point about the comedy, but I think it is about the flavor of comedy that he has. Like when we talk about that scene that you referenced, Thanmye, where his lackey is being a yes man. Like, yes, it is somewhat self-referential to the ridiculousness of the premise, but the humor is at the expense of the situation that Sudeep finds himself in.
Yes.
Not at the expense of the premise of the film.
Yes.
Exactly. So well put. Yeah.
So it is rooted in the character experience rather than just the idea of the film, which is what you kind of get with like in American blockbusters that kind of break the fourth wall and make you remember that, oh, this actor is now almost like he knows he's a character in a story, whereas with this, the character is still a character in his own story.
As you said, Ben, it's a lack of commitment and it's defensive and trying to be as cool as possible, but really sincerity is cool. And why would we go to the movies if not to see writers, directors, and actors all commit and do the thing as fully as possible?
Yeah,
definitely.
And I think when there is no humor to be found in the story, like when he's making a Bahubali or an RRR, then there's no need to imbue the script with jokes.
But there are kind of not jokes in Bahubali, but there's setup and payoff in the way that jokes sometimes work structurally, where it's exciting to see rules set out and then to see Bahubali break them intelligently to accomplish his goals. There is something that hits the same spot in the brain to me as humor. It's like, wow, like I can't believe that happened. I wasn't expecting that. And it's like a neighbor to funny.
Right.
I mean, it's the same way like horror can be a neighbor to comedy as well. Like there's a punchline or something.
Yeah.
Which is smart in a sense. Right?
And Ben, when you talk about like Rajamouli pushing his actors, right? And not letting the CG do all the heavy lifting, right? I think that kind of goes back to, because, you know, in a lot of like South Indian films, especially in these big tentpole films, a lot of the films are sort of more defined by the star that's in it, right? When Rajamouli is working with, say, in like, you know, in Bahubali, working with Prabhas, or in RRR, when he's working with Ramcharan and Junior NTR, who are massive, massive stars that by themselves, if they had worked with a lesser director, it would be kind of their movie, right? But because it's Rajamouli, right, and it's his film, he's the person that shows up. It's his film, right? That's what people start to look at it as. And so much of that has to do with how much he pushes his actors. And Eaga's maybe like where like he's able to kind of mold them into sort of the characters that he's created, where they don't have like a star image that he really needs to cater to. But you also kind of see that a little bit with Bahubali and also with RRR, where at the end of the day, like these actors, regardless of their stature or their star image, have to fit into Rajamouli's world. They function in his world, right? Their star image does not supersede the film that Rajamouli is making. And I think that's an interesting way to kind of think about and also sort of conceptualize the type of creative control that Rajamouli has with his films. Yeah, I guess that's just a point that kind of when you talked about how much control he has and how much he pushes his actors, it made me kind of think about that it's his film, right? And I think that, that's kind of also why we do this podcast, is to think about film, or why you guys, I'm the guest, sorry, why you guys do this podcast is to think about
why we do this podcast.
We do.
Well, okay, it's a community.
You can be part of this.
Why we do this podcast is to look at filmmakers and see, what is about their films that impacts us, right? Yeah, now I went on a tangent, sorry. But yeah, I guess that just kind of made me think about.
That was a beautiful tangent. If there's one thing about the movie that gives me the most pause, it's probably the character of Bindu and the way that Nani's pursuit of her is portrayed. It feels a little bit weird. And
I called it. Sorry. I'm calling it.
You called it?
I was texting Thanmye yesterday, and I was like, Eli's one gripe with the film is going to be about how he pursues her at the start of the film.
That is also my gripe.
That's the other thing I said. I was like, oh, Ben gave it 3 stars because of that. Because of the I knew it. And you said it, and I'm right, and Wilson and I are both right.
And we win. No, just kidding. Keep on going.
Keep on the argument.
Eli, I'll let you finish, but just
Yes.
I watched this with my girlfriend. Like, I've watched all of the Bahubali films. She fell asleep halfway because she got COVID. So
oh no.
That night she found out she got COVID. But anyway.
Oh no.
But she was like, I dislike this simpy behavior.
Oh.
And I am inclined to agree with her because I find that a little weird because Nani does this like wear her down kind of tactic.
Yeah. And it's viewed as charming.
And then we're supposed to just buy that Bindu is worn down and then is in love with a fly. So I think that part strains, not really belief, but like just strains my commitment to the characters a little bit. And it is a shame because that is the kind of setup of the film. And you gotta buy into the romance to really like buy into Bindu being in love with a fly. And I think that being lacking for me also didn't help with the later parts of the film.
I agree, Ben. It feels like an icky trope that is presented as charming here. And Nani, as an actor, is given an arduous task to, in the first 30 minutes, give us a sense of personality that later passes on to this fly. Again, he doesn't get to voice the fly later on. He has to give us a really strong and clear impression of who Nani is up top. And the movie, in my mind, works against itself by having him be a little bit icky. And I think the movie is aware of how Bindu's life is absorbed by the fly's goal to take revenge on Sudeep. And it makes fun of that a little bit, but that also feels a little bit weird. Like now all her life's goals are subsumed to this entirely. I don't think we really return to her charity afterwards. I kind of thought that all of Sudeep's money was going to wind up going to her charity, but that doesn't happen. All her life's goals become about aligning with the fly, which...
Well, it's not just aligning with the fly. She's protecting herself, right? Because if the fly doesn't kill Sudeep, Sudeep will get to Bindu.
But that even implies that she can't protect herself otherwise.
But, I mean, the fly's first mission is to convince Bindu that Sudeep is not a good guy, which he does quite early on. So I think once he passes that obstacle, then in a way Bindu is safe. I'm just wondering why they didn't just set up Bindu and Nani as like lovers from the start, rather than like try to do in the first 30 minutes a courtship and then solidify that romance and then kill Nani. Like if it had been that, Nani and Sudeep are deeply in love and Nani and Bindu. That'd be a very different movie. If Nani and Bindu were deeply in love, and then Sudeep is the interloper that kills Nani, then that gives Bindu a very strong motivation to also want to enact revenge herself. And then finding out that the fly is Nani will be much more of a discovery for her. Whereas now it's like, we don't know how in love they are, and then he died, and then she's in love with the fly more than she was in love with the man.
Yeah, but I think it's also the weight of that misconnection as well. I think there's an importance there where you're like, oh, I didn't get to say I love you to you, right? She had to say it through text that he never even got to see. I think there's a lot of moments there that, I don't know, I think it work as payoff when it is revealed that he is the fly later on.
Also, Nani having an active goal in those first 30 minutes to court Bindu gives us a better sense of his character than if he were static. My problem is more this masculine trope of him wearing her down and that being something that is supposed to endear us to him. Doesn't work for me.
I totally get where you guys are coming from, Eli and Ben. And I think something that's a little interesting too is this, I think, is a little bit more accentuated too when I think the film wants us to see Sudeep's attraction to her as something really creepy, right?
Yeah.
Which it is.
And we totally buy that. It is like very creepy. And he does make these like advances that are really uncomfortable. But at the same time, especially in the beginning, it feels like she's being victimized by two different men, right?
Yeah.
Even though like Rajamouli wants you to kind of side more with the Nani one just because he's more, I don't know, quote unquote charismatic, and sees Sudeep's as creepy, which it is. But that's always like a tough thing to do because it's both sort of very like creepy behavior, right? And it's hard to kind of be like, you should be rooting for this guy, not this guy, even though they're both creepy. That's always like a hard, very difficult thing to do because like in the back of your mind, you're always like, she should just like find a different guy, like go on a dating app or find a different guy and just get out of this whole thing entirely, or something like that, and, like at least being, especially when she's like victimized by two different men of like different degrees, but still like that is also something that is in the back of your mind all the time, at least in the back of my mind.
Right.
Despite my love of like the rest of the movie, that is also something that kind of prevents me from like absolutely loving this movie too. So I don't know. I guess like the way that I kind of rationalize it a little bit is that if you intend to like interpret it less as like Nani wearing her down and more as a courtship where she starts to realize that she likes this guy, and that's giving the movie a lot of grace, like, admittedly. But I think like, if you view it from that lens, and it also makes that dramatic beat of like Bindu realizing she loves Nani, and then that's when Nani gets abducted and killed. It makes that beat land more.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's the way I kind of think about the way Rajamouli was sort of intending it. I'm not trying to, of course, underplay how creepy that initial courtship is.
Mm-hmm.
But I think just sort of thinking about the mechanics of the film and what Rajamouli is trying to do, I guess that's kind of the way I kind of conceptualize what he was trying to intend with it, even though it probably lands, and it does land a little differently with us.
Do we have any more points that we want to hit before?
Let me look back at my screenshots to jog my memory also.
Yeah. Oh, did you take a screenshot of the intermission? His intermissions always hit so hard.
Oh, yes.
I will kill you. Written on the windscreen of
so metal.
Sudeep's car after crashing his car.
And it's all covered in dust. And then the light comes through the I will kill you. It's like just the perfect, thing. It's like, Rajamouli, his interval sequences are so fucking cool. Like a lot of like the function of an interval scene in Indian cinema is supposed to, I mean, you really don't have much of a choice except to come back, but sort of to heighten the stakes or to heighten the emotion or kind of leave you on leave you in a way to get you interested in the second half of the film. And he is like so good at creating these sequences in the middle of the movie, right? Because like a lot of Indian cinema, you know, especially popular Indian cinema, doesn't really follow the 3-act structure. And I'm sure you guys have kind of realized that. It is a lot of like first half, second half, right?
Yeah.
And then the interval scene is what separates the first half from the second half. And he is so good at creating that scene that kind of divides the two halves. And here he's like really good at it, kind of revealing to Sudeep that this fly is out to kill him.
Yeah.
Right? Like it kind of raises the stakes a little bit. And it also is a reveal of information too. You know, and he does this a lot in, like, for example, in Bahubali 2, the interval sequence is sort of a reveal of information, or sort of a reveal that even if Balal Deva is the king,
the bigger statue,
Bahubali is still the king of the people, regardless of whoever is like physically on the throne. It is just a way that he communicates to the audience about what is going on between the characters of the film. And it kind of leaves you on an interesting note where, especially in Bahubali 2, you're like, okay, where will this lead Balal Deva? And where will this lead Bahubali? Right? And then here it's like, oh my God, like what is going to happen between Sudeep and Eega and Nani? So yeah, that's something that I find that he does so well, is like creating these scenes that lead you into the second half with a kind of a renewed interest, I think, or not even a renewed interest, but sort of like a continuing the engagement on another level.
Yeah, it's like a refueling of sorts.
Exactly. Yeah.
What a fucking good director, man.
I think this talk about the structure of it is interesting because I think if you look at RR and Bahubali, I think you can maybe adhere the film to a kind of 3-act or 5-act structure. Especially when you think about Bahubali as being something like almost Shakespearean in its machinations.
Yeah.
I can see that kind of act structure helping those films flow in a way that escalates but also changes the stakes as you go through it. He always has these twists which change things up, change the positions of power, and also give you new information that repositions everyone in terms of how they relate to each other. And not necessarily, I would say, a criticism of Eega, but because it is a decidedly different film, it does feel more of a 2-part film between the 2 intervals.
Sure.
Yeah.
And the kind of story it is that it is a film about escalations. It is really one comedy idea, and then how far do we take it? Right? And then it just repeats that kind of central idea of fly irritates man over and over again in different ways. And I think it is just an interesting kind of comparison when you compare this with something like his more epic stuff like Bahubali and RRR.
Well, speaking of intervals, I do want to know what you guys think of the very ending where Nani gets reincarnated as another fly and writes, "I am back" on the screen. I, for
Eega
one...
2? Eega the conclusion?
3ga?
Yes.
I, for one, wanted Bindu to be free of all this and go live a normal life.
Why can't he reincarnate as like something else? Like, why is he a fly again? You're supposed to do good and then be reincarnated as like the next step or something, right? I don't know.
It is just so you can have that very cool musical sequence at the end, guys. That's the only reason.
That's it.
That is a good sequence.
Okay. Thank you once again, Thanmye, for coming back onto the podcast to talk about Eega. Do not be a stranger. You will not be a stranger, because we are definitely going to be bringing you back on for maybe 2 more episodes this year with the new Ratnam out, and definitely to talk about RRR. So it's probably gonna be a very short time before we see you again on the pod.
I'm so glad, and I hope you guys watching Rajamouli's films have, again, like with what I hoped with Money, kind of appreciate the type of filmmaking, you know, the type of stories he likes to tell. Again, you know, and lately I think with RRR he's starting to get a lot of international, worldwide recognition. Some of it being a little bit more condescending than others, but you know, I think overall, like, the exposure is really good. I think especially for like a future RRR episode, I definitely want to talk about a lot of the more problematic elements, especially the way that Rajamouli kind of deals with caste and sort of like his political engagement. It's something that's sort of front and center in RRR. So it's not really something we can really talk about, I think, with the Bahubali duology or with Eega as much as you really can with RRR. So hopefully when we have that discussion, we can kind of delve into that, and I'll be sending you guys stuff and it'll be something of an informed discussion there. But yeah, that's definitely something that I don't think we really got to talk about, especially because a lot of that stuff isn't really front and center in the films that we talked about. But I'm so glad you guys brought me on to talk about one of my favorite directors. And I think I said this on the Bahubali episode, but I'm telling you, the top two blockbuster filmmakers in the world right now are Christopher Nolan and SS Rajamouli. And I hope I've convinced you of that. Maybe not, I don't know. But but I at least hope I've convinced you that Rajamouli is one of the most inventive, one of the most like the smartest blockbuster filmmakers that are working right now. And yeah, I'm just glad you guys watched these movies and you guys found your own interpretations. And yeah, I'm just so happy you guys watched this stuff. Again, like I have such a nostalgic connection to Rajamouli that sometimes I'm a little bit afraid when other people watch it that they're not going to respond to it as similarly as I have. But Wilson, I think, especially has. And then you guys have too in your own sort of capacities too, which I'm really grateful for. And yeah, I'm really interested to hear what you guys from these three movies, like what you guys sort of have gathered from his filmmaking and the types of stories he likes to tell.
Wait, is that a question for us? Oh, that is a question for us.
It is.
Okay.
I mean, I was trying to transition into your guys' final thoughts. That's what I was trying to
do. I need to think.
We've said pieces of this before, but big takeaways for me are maximum impact without exhausting the audience. So that means really smart structuring and pacing on the writing side, and also pulling off what is kind of a magic trick of being able to constantly up the ante on what you are being shown and what characters are accomplishing. This is summed up perhaps by saying that Rajamouli has boundless creativity and invention, and I entirely agree that he's maybe the smartest and also just most fun blockbuster filmmaker working today.
Mm-hmm.
I think the biggest takeaway I have from watching Rajamouli is just his sincerity and emotional honesty that we've touched on is so strong, which is why it makes him such a good blockbuster filmmaker. There is like zero pretense. There is zero, what's the word? Like this dude he's not slacking off. He's making a movie every single time. And I think that's the thing about him that I appreciate the most. And it makes these blockbuster films feel created by somebody rather than just being created by committee or created for a paycheck. And I think that's what he brings to the craft, and that's why the films are good, is because you care about the material and he cares about the storytelling so much. And that's why they're good movies. Doesn't really matter like whether I loved Eega or not, but I think I can see that he is always going at each of the films at like 1,000%.
Yeah.
And it is very clear when you watch these films that he is giving a shit. So
Yeah.
Right. And I feel like I've talked about a lot of what I think about Rajamouli, but I think rewatching these movies, this is kind of feels a little bit left field, but it's going to come into what I appreciate about Rajamouli or something that I gathered new this time. I was recently watching M. Night Shyamalan's Old, like rewatching it. And something about that movie that I really love, and something that I've realized I think I love in like storytelling in general, is emotional and visual immediacy. And what I mean by that is like is just economical storytelling. And that's something that I get a lot from M. Night Shyamalan's films, especially Old. But something that I realized I think was sort of kind of an epiphany that I had is that's what I really love about Rajamouli's filmmaking. There is a economical style in which he tells his stories. Even though he's kind of working in this Indian popular format, like his frames, his conception of story and character, they all work on such a primal level, on such a emotional and visually immediate level. He has such a hand as a filmmaker in delivering the maximum amount of visual and emotional information to the viewer, right? And I think for me personally, those are the types of films I tend to gravitate towards. And that's something that I've realized that I really love about Rajamouli, especially during this rewatch that we did for these podcasts.
Beautifully said.
Yeah. And yeah, I really have to thank you, Thanmye, because I feel like I've have one of my new favorite working directors right now. Like, I think Rajamouli, like, I agree with all of you. Rajamouli's really working on a level that not many other directors are currently, and being able to deliver movies at such high levels, like constantly, that are so entertaining at almost every beat is really amazing to me. And I think also, I wrote about this in my RRR review, but how Rajamouli as a director is able to make these like superhuman movies, in that he understands that being a superhero is not just your extraordinary abilities, right? It is always tied to something. Like, you're always tied to like a promise or a fate, or it's destiny for you. And I think he is the only director in the world that really like gets that. I think it's so incredible how in every film of his that I've seen, like even Maryada Ramana, there is a sense of destiny that is happening whenever the guy steps out of the house. Like, I think that increases stakes 100-fold for me. And yeah, I feel like we have lots more to say, and I also am very excited to dive into his back catalog as well, like his pre Magadira stuff. So yeah, I will be doing that in my own time. Follow me on Letterboxd.
I thank you again for coming on to the podcast. It's always a joy to have you on and to learn more about the movies that you love.
Yeah, and every time I'm on, this feels like a bunch of friends, and we are all friends, just talking about movies. And I think this is personally a great outlet for me to talk about stuff that I am very passionate about, but can't usually talk about, and I really loved sharing what I think about Rajamouli, because like he was a director that I couldn't really talk to a lot of people about because no one watched him, right? I watched him, and maybe like my parents watched him, and maybe my parents' friends watched him, but like it's weird talking to your parents' friends about that. You know what I mean? Like, you want to talk to your peers about it,
Mm-hmm.
And here, this has not felt like work. It's felt like a lot of friends kind of like obsessing over this director, and which I love to do. And
Simp behavior.
You've definitely indulged me in that in that desire of mine. So I'm so happy to be on and talk about Rajamouli, and of course talk about any other filmmakers in the future. I'm glad to be a regular guest on this podcast.
Hey, we keep on threatening Tenet, so when that happens, you will be back.
I'm ready for the greatest Indian filmmaker of all time.
Yeah, Christopher Nolan.
Indian filmmaker of all time. We will have that Tenet podcast.
Whether we like it or not.
Yeah, you know what we'll do? We'll reverse it so that I'm the host and you guys are the guests.
Oh. A high concept Tenet episode sounds like so much fun.
It's gonna cut deep.
Oh,
Really?
Nice.
Tuck peed.
Cut deep.
Thanmye, before we close out, do you have anywhere where your listeners can find you or your work? You want to plug anything?
Oh, yeah, I guess. I I guess like follow me on Letterboxd. I have not been posting as much, but I do regularly watch like Indian films and just like type what I think about it, I guess. So follow me on Letterboxd if you like that stuff, and follow me on Instagram. I don't post that often, but I'm there. And yeah, I guess that's it. Follow me on Twitter if you want to see me obsess over like certain movies for like 3-4 months on end. Yeah, and yeah, that's it. That's my plug.
And we'll have links to all of the above in the show notes.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Okay, let's close it out. Thank you for listening to this episode of Deep Cut. Please rate and review because that helps us keep making the show. Be sure to subscribe to us where you listen to podcasts so you'll know when our next episode drops. Keep up with Deep Cut on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Letterboxd at Deep Cut Pod. Join us to talk about movies on our Discord server, to which you'll find a link in the description. Thank you to Justina Yam for our beautiful artwork. I'm Wilson.
I'm Ben.
I'm Eli.
And I'm Thanmye.
Take care, and we're looking forward to talking about more movies with you next time.
Eega, Eega, Eega.
Woo! Thanks, Thanmye.
Thanks, guys.
That was wonderful.